everybody.
Hi there, welcome back. I'm Larry.
I'm Emily.
And this is PlantedInGod. And so we are trailing towards the end. We're getting close. Hopefully you've been joining us this whole way. We've been doing the Gospel of John as a reading challenge before Christmas. And today we are on
Chapter 18.
Chapter 18. So we're getting closer to the end of John, which also means we're getting closer to Christmas. Hopefully your shopping's done. Emily, is your shopping done?
No.
Good, me neither.
So, any pre-thoughts?
No, I think we can dive right in.
Sweet. Okay, so chapter 18, and we are opening up where they are in the garden at this point.
Yes, they have made their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. So we've spent the better part of 4 chapters getting up to the garden, and now we finally made it. And we can see that from verse 2 that this was a common meeting place for Jesus and the disciples. They would go here often. It's mentioned that it was their habit to go there, Jesus' habit to go there to pray in the garden. And Judas knew this, and that's why it becomes the central location, or the location that he knows that that's where they're headed after the feast, and that's where he brings the guard. And the guard is a mixture of 3 groups that come to arrest Jesus. You have the Roman guards, you have the officers of the chief priests, or the temple guard, and then you have the Pharisees themselves. And then Jesus and the squad break a lot of laws, Jewish laws, in the arrest and trial of Jesus. Making this arrest at night being one of those laws that they broke. So like right away they're breaking the law. They're not doing this legal according to their own books.
I also find it interesting too, right? They did it at night, which when you're going to do something that is like, that you want to kind of hide from the public eye, you do it at night. You know, people steal things at night, you know.
Right. And this also kind of plays off of that kind of sub-theme of the light versus the darkness, right? Where this is happening at night in the darkness, right? The evil comes out in the darkness. And so that's one of the things that kind of plays on here. And I want you to look back at the conversation between Jesus and the crowd that's come to arrest him. Jesus asks who they're seeking. They say Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus responds with, I am. That he, that some Bibles add into it, that is an addition that our translators have added to kind of make it flow better from a textual reading perspective in English. But really when you look at what he's actually saying, he says, I am. He's making the I am claim, the claim that God only has. Some would try to say that Jesus using the I am statement is like a form of self-defense. Like he's helpless, so he's making the I am claim in self-defense. However, that's not the case. Jesus is in full control of the whole situation. He is God in the flesh, and they are only allowed to arrest him when he gives permission to.
Yeah, because you see that I think it's verse 4, he went forward.
Yeah.
Or it might be a little further down, but it says that he goes forward or goes towards them. So noting that, you know, it's really the ball's in his court.
Yes. And then in verse 10, we see Peter making a fool of himself and deciding that it would be a good idea to attack one of the people arresting. He's gonna make his claim. He said earlier that evening that he would die for Jesus, and now he's proven his point. It's like, no, Jesus, I'm not gonna deny you. Like you said, I'm gonna die for you. And it's interesting when you look at the Greek word that's used to describe Peter's sword. You see it's more of a ceremonial knife, kind of like a steak knife, maybe a little bit bigger than that. So it wasn't like a large battle sword like the Roman guard would have on them.
No, but it had to have been pretty sharp to actually because this doesn't say it, but it actually slices the ear right off.
Yes, it does. It takes the ear off. I'll also notice that Peter and his little ceremonial knife don't go after the guard. He goes after one of the Pharisees' servants.
Yeah.
He goes after one of the people he knows is unarmed. So even though he's making a fool of himself, he's at least logical about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go after the guy that doesn't have a weapon. Take at least him out before they take me out.
What I find interesting about all that, too, is that you would think that in that moment, because, right, it doesn't say it, I don't think, in John, but, Jesus puts his ear back on.
Yeah.
Bam, just like that. You would think that person would be like, oh, wow, he's God.
You'd think so.
In that moment.
Right.
But, we don't have any evidence where it says that, and so all we can do is kind of speculate on it. But
yeah.
My heart wants that to be the truth.
It's very possible because you have John recording the name of the servant. And so this shows... I
thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, this shows that there's some kind of relationship between John's family, and the Pharisee, right? And you see that if you jump down to verse 16, it speaks of that there's some kind of familial relationship.
Right, he's allowed into
the house because they know him. Mm-hmm. And who knows, it very well could be that guy came to faith. And then I want to take a look at verse 11 real quick. I want to read it here. It says this, "But Jesus said to Peter, 'Put your sword back into your sheath. Am I not to drink the cup of that the Father has given me?'" So the cup that Jesus is speaking of here is referring to the cup of God's wrath on sin. This comes from Jeremiah 25, verses 15 and 16. Which refers to those who take part of God's cup of wrath are spiritually dead. And so Jesus is referring to the fact that he is going to become sin for the world. Like he is going to take on the punishment of sin for us, which means that he is going to be spiritually dead so that we can have spiritual life.
Well, and this just also shows that Peter doesn't fully understand that yet.
No,
either.
He doesn't. None of the disciples really fully understand it until after he's resurrected. Mm-hmm. And Jesus teaches them that.
So then we get into 12 to 14, which talks about the high priest that talks about the prophecy.
Yes, so I actually want to look at this in a kind of a weird chunk. So if you look at 12 to 14 and 19 through 23, those two sections are the trial, the religious trial of Jesus, and then sprinkled in the middle you have the events happening with Peter.
Yeah, it's almost like you're watching a movie and it's like, cut the scene, go to this.
Right, but they're happening at the same time. Right, yeah. So like in your movie scenario, you cut the scene and you get the couple over there talking, but you see the main character talking in the background, right? Because it's all happening at the same time. So it's kind of like that picture-in-picture type thing happening here. The first part, 12 through 14, records the fact that Jesus was brought before Ananias first. Ananias was the high priest from approximately 7 to 14 AD, so before Caiaphas was high priest. And Ananias was Caiaphas's father-in-law. And so we can see from reading through this that the trial is fake. Jesus' fate has already been determined, right? They know that that Caiaphas prophesied that he's going to die for everyone. Mm-hmm. So the sentence was already determined. And Ananias just really in his sham of a trial just tries to incriminate Jesus and the disciples. And we see, specifically looking at verses 19 through 22, how Jesus will stand on his rights under Jewish civil law. And he makes the point that he has not taught in secret, but he has taught openly in public. Everything he said, you've heard.
Yeah, I found it, well, because I know it's like the trial or whatever that they're giving him. But that he basically is like, everything I've already done, you're asking me a question that I've already answered.
Yeah.
Basically, and laid it all out there for them.
Exactly. And then we see that that Jesus in verse 22 gets struck for not playing Ananias' game. Ananias is just trying to get him to play the game, but Jesus is like, no, I'm not having it. I'm going to stand on my own rights and not. And then jumping down to verse 24, John really doesn't record the second half of the religious trial. If you were to go chronologically, you have the trial before Caiaphas, or the trial before Ananias, the trial before Caiaphas, and then Pilate, Herod, Pilate. That's how the whole day, kind of evening to next day, play out. John records Ananias, and then the fact that Jesus goes to Caiaphas. But then we get the result of that being Jesus taken to Pilate. So that's kind of how that plays out. And then in the middle, like I said, sprinkled in the middle, so verses 15 through 18 and 25 through 27 record Peter's denial of Jesus. The first time Peter denies Jesus is in verses 15 through 18 during the trial of Ananias. The disciples had scattered except for Peter and John. They follow the mob to go to the trial. This, again, is where we see John has some kind of relationship with the family of Ananias, is allowed in, gets Peter in. That's when a maid at the door confronts Peter, and Peter simply denies it. And then verses 25 through 27, you have the second and third denials occurring during Caiaphas's trial. I think John's focus was to record that more than the trial itself.
Yeah, I think with his first denial, it was very like subtle, like no, simple. And then the second one was kind of like that too, but by the third one, he was more aggressive in his response.
Yes, John doesn't record that, but if you were to go to the other gospel accounts, I think it's Matthew, the way Matthew writes it, is he even curses.
Yeah, well, you kind of anticipate it too as you're reading, you know what I mean? As you read through it, you can kind of see where he gets questioned by the people that they're warming.
He's getting more frustrated.
Fire. Yeah, he's like, no, I said no. Like, why don't you believe me?
Right. But yeah, I think John was more so focused on recording that event actually happening because it is direct fulfillment of prophecy from earlier that night. And that brings us to verses 28 through 32, where Jesus is now presented before Pilate. So they take Jesus from Caiaphas's place and they lead him to Pilate's place, Pilate's palace, if you will.
I think also too, it's a good thing to note that it was early morning by this point. So he had gone through this like through the night.
Yes.
He was going through that trial.
The trial had gone through the night. It would be roughly sunrise. So 4 or 5 in the morning is when they're taking him before Pilate here. And so the first night of Passover had ended. And so now we're moving into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that's kind of where you'll see it here. Like, I thought Passover was just one night. Didn't they just have the Passover meal and now they're having another Passover meal? Well, the way that this kind of works, this holiday in the Jewish tradition, for those of you that aren't aware, is you have Passover, and then you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is also called Passover. Kind of confusing. But that's the way that it works, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread lasts for 7 days. And within that Feast of Unleavened Bread, you have a high Sabbath, which is that Saturday. So all of these events are happening on Friday evening, and then we'll get to Saturday, Silent Saturday, and then Sunday is the resurrection. So that's kind of how it plays out from a day perspective, day of the week. And if you're interested, I do have a nerd study going through the day of the 3 days and the Jewish reckoning of time that I'd be happy to do if there's interest for it. But it's really nerdy.
It's good though.
Yeah. Pilate then comes out to meet them because they can't enter Pilate's palace, then be the Jews being ceremonial clean for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I want to take a look at verse 29. It reads, "So Pilate came outside to them and said, 'What accusation do you bring against this man?'" Pilate is following Roman protocol. He is asking for the charge first. And this is where Judas was supposed to fill, right? Judas Iscariot, whom we don't know where he is, and reading John's account, he's gone.
Yeah, last we heard of him, he was
betraying Jesus in the garden.
Yep.
And so he's now gone. He is supposed to be there to answer that question. He's not there, and because he's MIA, the Jews have to the Jewish leaders have to dance. And listen to the dance, right? Look at this, verse 30. They replied, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." They don't answer. They don't give the charge. He's a criminal. Just take our word for it and take him and crucify him.
It's really unfair to Pilate, to be honest, because it puts him in a really weird position.
Yep.
And you can see later through the scripture that, it's almost as if he maybe could believe.
Yeah, maybe. There's no record of that, but he definitely doesn't want to be involved in this at all. The leaders in verse 31 tell Pilate that they are seeking for the death penalty, and when John says in verse 32 that they could not legally put him to death because it was to fulfill the way in which Jesus would die, there's what had happened is 6 months before this, the Jews had the autonomy within Rome to execute people. And the Jewish mode of execution was always by stoning. So what had happened is 6 months prior, Rome came in and said, "You know what, Jews, you can't do that anymore. If you want to execute someone, you have to prove they're guilty under Roman law, and we will execute them." And so they took that autonomy away from the Jews. And so now they legally can't put anyone to death. And the Roman form of execution was crucifixion, which is what was prophesied that the Messiah would be hung on a tree. That brings us to our next section, verses 33 through 38, where we have Jesus being questioned by Pilate. Take a look at verse 33. It says, "So Pilate went back to the governor's residence, summoned Jesus, and asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?'" This is the official charge that is brought against Jesus. He's wanting to know if Jesus is a competitor to Caesar. That is officially what the Jews finally landed on charging Jesus with.
I find it interesting how Jesus responds, though.
Yes.
Right? He answers a question with a question, which he does a lot.
Yeah.
So I can just read it, but he says, Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?"
Then Pilate officially doesn't understand. You see that in verse 35, what Jesus is saying, because he has no frame of reference of Messiah, because he is a Roman, a Greek-minded, that he doesn't carry that frame of reference. So that's why he answers with, "I am not a Jew, am I?" Right? So he doesn't have that frame of reference. He doesn't know what Jesus is talking about. So then Jesus then replies in 36 that his kingdom is not of this world. And he's making it very clear that his kingdom is not of this world. Otherwise, his servants would be fighting, right? He would have raised an army, and he would be fighting against Caesar to take him down. But that's not the case. He's now standing here before this Pilate.
I would venture to guess, too, that it wouldn't be much of a fight.
No.
Be more like it's a win, bam.
Well, if Jesus were to actually fight, yeah.
Right, that's
at
what I
this
mean.
moment. Yeah, and I want to point out, because a lot of amillennials will take this verse and it'll be like their linchpin verse that they take out of context to say that Jesus will not have a literal kingdom on earth. And what he's saying here, though, is he's saying that his kingdom is not of this world or not from this world. In the all-millennial view, they will say that his kingdom is not in this world. That's not what Jesus said. He doesn't use that word in. My kingdom is not in. No, he says it's not of this world, meaning that it's not of the world system, right? Remember earlier when Jesus was walking on the path with the disciples and he said that they are not of this world, but in this world, right? He said that exact phrase. They're not of the world, but they're in the world. Here, Jesus is saying his kingdom is not of the world, but it will be in the world.
Right.
When he comes back to reign again as king, it will be in the world. Right now, his kingdom is not of the world. So, reading the Bible, literal, contextual, hermeneutical, historically, right, you can avoid pitfalls like the amillennial issue. And then I like the discourse between Jesus and Pilate in verses 37 and 38, right? Jesus tells Pilate that everyone that is of the truth will hear my voice, and then Pilate responds with that relativistic point of view. What is truth?
Yeah, I found that to be such a... It is literally what we struggle with in our current world right now.
Exactly. Nobody knows what truth is because
apparently they
has...
didn't know back then either. So.
No, it's something. Relativism is something that is alive and well.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, that sounds really familiar.
Yeah.
It's just great how the Bible's so relevant.
It is.
You know, God is saying the Bible is relevant. Everything about it is okay. Like there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
So then we get down to 39 to 40, which will wrap up the chapter.
Yes.
And so he's talking about possibly releasing him.
Right.
Because there's a custom that they follow.
There is a custom they follow. First is that you have Pilate that goes outside and says that he finds no basis for this accusation. I don't see a way. I'm going to release him. He tries to follow the custom of releasing a current prisoner, and so he asks, do you want this Jesus, or I have another prisoner here named Barabbas that I can release. Now, Barabbas, the man that Jesus replaces, this is interesting fun facts I don't know, many people don't know, that Barabbas was an insurrectionist, a rebel, and a murderer. He was guilty of the very thing that Jesus was charged with, trying to usurp Caesar. Barabbas was actually guilty of it. And his name, this is fun, is Bar Abba in Aramaic. Bar meaning son of, Abba, father. So his name, son of father. From other sources, we can find that his full Aramaic name was Yeshua Bar Abba. Interesting. So he has the same name as Jesus. He carries the title of Jesus, and he is guilty of the charge of Jesus. And yet, this is the man that the innocent Jesus of Nazareth replaces on the cross.
All right, so that wraps up chapter 18.
Yes, it does.
We will see you guys tomorrow for chapter 19.
Groovy.
All right, see ya.
Bye.